Friends, welcome to this day. Good Sunday to you. And this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Greg, over to you. Tell us all about Annie Dillard, whom I know from Pilgrim at Tinker Creek.
Yes, that I think is probably her most famous work. Annie Dillard has spent most of her life teaching. She's written a lot, but she's always thought of herself as a college professor first. I think at the University of one of the Washington State schools, and then she taught English for years at Wesleyan University in Connecticut. Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, I guess, is what she's best known for. It's kind of a compendium of her essays, but she's done a lot. She's done a lot of fiction and poetry, but a lot of just regular nonfiction essays. But they're in no way, I think, regular. She, to me, and from what I've read, when I started reading her, it was in college, kind of helped reinvent the contemporary nonfiction form of an essay, because if it wasn't written as prose, you could probably just reset it to look like verse, and because it feels like poetry to me. And I recommend any of her things to anybody who's interested in, at my stage in my late teens, being exposed to creative nonfiction, really good original creative nonfiction. And then I started realizing, what's the difference really between fiction and nonfiction? Because a lot of fiction is taken from the writer's experience, things they'd lived through, maybe change the names or change some other things to it. And why is nonfiction, supposed to be so boring? Before that, I'd thought of it as basically journalism. It was reporting on what you saw, stick to the facts. Well, Annie Dillard's writing, and this part from Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, called Total Eclipse, a 10-page reflection on a couple days when she and her husband Gary, who were living on the coast, I believe in Seattle at the time, had heard that a total eclipse, a solar eclipse, was going to happen in February of 1979. And so they got in the car and found a cheap motel near Yakima and stayed there for, I think, a day and a half, and then just drove back home. So this, in 10 pages, she seems to have crammed in her reflections, of course, but on what? On the natural world, on the history of the planet, on cosmology, and just people. They got in a car and went on a road trip and stayed in a little cheap motel. And so I learned a lot, and it's always going to stick with me, I think, because it reminded me, or I guess taught me at the time, this is in college when I first read it, to just be more observant of everything, and to look, as she did, to find the eternal in the boring, in the mundane details of everyday life. Because a lot of the deepest thoughts in this essay come not from lying on a hillside with a bunch of strangers holding her husband's hand as the whole world turned dark, but from the time in the car and the hotel they were in. They were in, like I said, this cheap hotel, and she goes off on every detail about it. This, everyone's, been exposed to bad hotel art. Well, she focused really hard on this painting of a clown in the hotel room, and its face was made out of fruit, and wondered what the artist might have been thinking, where she was, I guess. Like any good writer, she's not necessarily an extremely well-traveled person, but just an extremely good eye of taking in everything around her. And like I said, seeing the details in everything, and sometimes the holy in the details of everything. So, I should have asked, has anybody read this Total Eclipse or anything else by Annie Dillard? No, I can't see Nancy or Andrew, but let me know. I know, thank you for staying on mute, but interrupt me with any questions as we go along. And just like, any other piece of art, a movie or something else, this is something I'd like to show you a few things. So if you don't mind, just reading a couple paragraphs just along the way. And I chose a few just because of uh, a great writer I've noticed, like her, doesn't know how to just tell a great story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, but she just writes a perfect sentence, if you know what I mean. So sometimes she can start a paragraph just, this is how the day started, and the last sentence of the paragraph is just a work of art in itself, I feel like. So I'm reading someone's poetry. And because it's so creative, the 10 pages is not done chronologically. It's not, this is how the first day, second day, third day. It was how she was feeling. So she's relating this 2-day experience with her and Gary, the drive out, the hotel room, walking down this mountain slope to get in the right position to see this eclipse, and looking around at other people, looking into her husband's eyes and everything she felt. So it's not all perfectly, this happened before that, because it's a mix of emotions, and she flies off on tangents about what this moment in her life meant to her, and other things that she had experienced before, and things she'd read before, that were all kind of coming together, as I think happens in human life. Just something that I think it takes writing down to remember. And I wish I would write more things down to remember in my life. The really epical kind of things you never want to forget, but also the things that you shouldn't forget, of day-to-day things. So let me just show you how first of all she kicks off, and like honestly, how Shakespeare would start a play, or somebody like James Joyce would start a novel. This is how this thing launches, and it's punchy. So not knowing what to get into it, other than it's just her recollection of seeing a solar eclipse, she says, "It had been like dying, that sliding down the mountain pass. It had been like the death of someone, irrational, that sliding down the mountain pass and into the region of dread. It was like slipping into fever, or falling down that hole in sleep from which you wake yourself whimpering. We had crossed the mountains that day, and now we were in a strange place, a hotel in central Washington, in a town near Yakima. The eclipse we had traveled here to see would occur early the next morning. I lay in bed. My husband, Gary, was reading beside me. I lay in bed and looked at the painting on the hotel room wall. It was a print of a detailed and lifelike painting of a smiling clown's head made out of vegetables. It was a painting of the sort which you do not intend to look at, and which, alas, you never forget. Some tasteless fate presses it upon you. It becomes part of the complex interior junk you carry with you wherever you go. 2 years have passed since the total eclipse of which I write. During those 2 years, I have forgotten, I assume, a great many things I wanted to remember, but I have not forgotten that clown painting or its lunatic setting in the old hotel." And so with that, pretty interesting, just from 2 paragraphs, you're immediately just part of, I think, her mind. And she refers to it a lot. She talks about her mind, one's mind, the mind, and just human experience. So I love it for this also, just that like any other good piece of art, really, really quickly, you're in it, and we're in it. You and the writer are in a dialogue with each other. And somehow I feel that she knows she's talking to me in a kind of, not so much a metaphysical sense, but she knows when she sent this to her publisher, I guess in 1982, about something she had seen in 1979, that she's speaking to whoever reads this. And whoever reads this, she wants them to feel like she felt. She wants them to laugh at the things that she laughed at, and cry at the things that made her cry, which is, in a way, I think, yeah, communication and telling stories may be what makes us human. So, and I was a sophomore in college first reading this. And what did it strike me as? The vacations I had taken, I guess, the things I had missed, the things I wish I'd remembered, but also some of the weird little random things that are just stuck in your head forever. We've all, I'm sure, had just, random things from a old hotel that we wish we could forget, but it just, there's some things I know will never get out of my mind, even though I might try to forget them, such as it is. And so that's, it does start with a setup. So it's a bit chronological there. It's the first thing telling you what's about to happen. But after that, it's all over the place. She goes off on, there's no, I don't think any dialogue in it. She refers to people and the people she met, what they look like, what they said. But, and I'm looking at it right here, almost a complete lack of quotes. The only people that she quotes verbatim are some writers that had affected her. And so as she and Gary are, they'd hike down this mountain pass in the Yakima Valley just to find a space. I pictured almost, going out for going to see fireworks maybe on the 4th of July and bringing your blanket to lie down and just get ready to experience something together. But there was a big group of people. There were a lot of other pilgrims, I guess, who had come to experience this. And geologically speaking, I don't remember exactly, and she doesn't go into a lot of details about the last total solar eclipses that had been. But this was a big one, and you can, once you Google it, I guess, you can find some things from national news of February 26th, 1979, and how this total solar eclipse, pretty rare, was really only going to be able to be seen for Americans in parts of Washington state and in Oregon at the time. So upon first reading, it seemed to me kind of scary. There's a lot of, like, she uses the word dread, a lot of dread, and that's how she sets it up. You can tell what is about to come because, the writing of it, she was, preparing us, the reader, for something really life-changing. It was at times scary for her. It was at times religious for her, and times just really boring. At the end of the story, she said, well, it hadn't really completely ended. There was still a partial eclipse, but it was time to just go back home. We, it might have changed us, for the rest of our lives, but it was just another day when you think about it. And let's see, the next thing I'd love to read.
There are a few more things to tell from this level. Excuse me, the level of the restaurant. One is the old joke about breakfast, quote, "It can never be satisfied, the mind, never," unquote. Wallace Stevens wrote that, and in the long run, he was right. The mind wants to live forever, or to learn a very good reason why not. The mind wants the world to return its love or its awareness. The mind wants to know all the world and all eternity and God. The mind's sidekick, however, will settle for 2 eggs over easy. The dear, stupid body is as easily satisfied as a spaniel. And incredibly, the simple spaniel can lure the brawling mind to its dish. It is everlastingly funny that the proud, metaphysically ambitious, clamoring mind will hush if you give it an egg.
So that, again, just a random reflection in a 2-day road trip, because the hotel had a diner, of course, and they had to eat. So she obviously, she and Gary took some breaks from the metaphysicality of watching everything they saw just change. The whole world changed like they'd never experienced it before. Everything looked different. And she was thinking about medieval and ancient societies that might have been just as scared as she and Gary, watching everything change and not exactly understanding why. But, you know, we get hungry, and eggs over easy is fine today. So, and the little, you know, again, just the perfect observational nature of you know, how she writes, and I guess how she lives, has made me feel good in times of, you know, dread and things that are scary that I don't completely understand, because we're all waking up the next morning and we have to have breakfast. What else can I say? I could go on for ever about this and things like this, because like, I guess a lot of good writing, it made me think about a lot of other writers and some of my other favorite things, which I guess everybody understands, right? If you read something that really you think changes you, you've got to, at least subconsciously, be reminded of other things that have, you know, changed you, or maybe other, you know, good writing that it reminds you of. And this, because of her just changing how she, you know, how closely she observes the small and the infinite. What is one of the first things that came up to me, I guess, because I'd been reading a lot of Shakespeare at the time, one of Hamlet's soliloquies, basically this, do you guys remember that, what a piece of work is man? How noble in reason, how infinite in faculties. It's basically just, you know, Hamlet telling us it's all in your attitude. You could, you know, see the world if you want to as a perfect, wonderful, beautiful place and all its creations, you know, never, you know, you can't conceive of anything better. But if you're not, if you're in a bad mood, you know, what is this world? The quintessence of dust, Hamlet called it. And just, so it's up to us. And good writing, even nonfiction like this, it's more about the writer than what she's observing, because, you know, she could have put a happier spin on this and made it sound like a picnic, but she got really historic and metaphysical, and it made her do some research on geology and the universe. And she looked at her husband in a different way. There's some parts of this where when it's actually happening, she describes the whole valley and all this crowd of people, some of them screaming. She said they were screaming together when it was happening because this huge darkness was just coming to them really, really fast. And everything looked like, she said, it was an old movie film. Everything was just slightly a wrong color. It came out of focus a little bit. And that was weird because her husband looked different. The grass looked different. The sky, everything looked different. So she was forced to change, you know, how her mind observed things for a while. And worth remembering. So again, I'm glad she wrote this down.
The sky's blue was deepening, but there was no darkness. The sun was a wide crescent like a segment of a tangerine. The wind freshened and blew steadily over the hill. The eastern hill across the highway grew dusky and sharp. The towns and orchards in the valley to the south were dissolving into the blue light. Only the thin river held a trickle of sun. Now the sky to the west deepened to indigo, a color never seen. A dark sky usually loses color. This was a saturated deep indigo up in the air. Stuck up into that unworldly sky was the cone of Mount Adams, and the alpenglow was upon it. The alpenglow is that red light of sunset, which holds out on snowy mountaintops long after the valleys and tablelands are dimmed. Look at Mount Adams, I said. And that was the last sane moment I remember. I turned back to the sun. It was going. The sun was going and the world was wrong. The grasses were wrong. They were platinum. Their every detail of stem, head, blade had shown lightless and artificially distinct as an art photographer's platinum print. This color has never been seen on Earth. The hues were metallic. Their finish was matte. The hillside was a 19th century tinted photograph from which the tints had faded. All the people you see in the photograph, distinct and detailed as their faces look, are now dead. The sky was navy blue. My hands were silver. All the distant hills' grasses were fine spun metal, which the wind laid down. I was watching a faded color print of a movie filmed in the Middle Ages. I was standing in it by some mistake. I was standing in a movie of hillside grasses filmed in the Middle Ages. I missed my own century, the people I knew, and the real light of day.
So like, because it felt like it is poetry to me. I guess some people just call this, prose poetry. A poet can put things in paragraphs or in verse. And she doesn't have to go into detail sometimes and try to explain exactly what she's thinking, to define her emotions. She just has to, like a good poet, try to say as much as she can in the fewest words and leave it out there for us to see, how it affects us. If we, have felt anything similar in our lives. And she talks about death quite a bit right there. We were dead, basically. It wasn't a simile, it was a metaphor. We felt alone because everything around us had changed and we didn't know what to do with it. So that to me is poetry, and something that, I don't really remember. Did any of you take the time out to see the last eclipse we had a few years ago here? Yeah, I was at work in the Loop, and I just walked outside for a bit, and it didn't look perfect. But I remember looking at, tell me what you guys remember from that thing a few years ago, because I was looking at the other people on the street more than I was trying to, look at the eclipse itself. Did anybody feel scared at all, or was it just, excited about a historical event?
Yes, and trying to get the glasses right. You couldn't just look at it. You had to put on special glasses, if you remember, too.
That's right. Yes. Or those, supposedly we were told when we were kids, it was that one in 79, I guess, to get an old shoebox and poke a little hole in it, and then just take a look at just that little bit, because otherwise it would burn your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't get into that in this essay. She doesn't really talk about, the physical damage or anything like that. It's very spiritual. Sometimes overtly, but even when she's talking about, having 2 eggs in the hotel restaurant, there's something just, I think, spiritual about it, in that, our day-to-day, this, the mind and the body, as I think Descartes told us, can be thought of as completely different things. Doctors today would say differently, that we're all really, their mind and body are, completely, really, really affected. But this was something she saw in 1979 and wrote about a couple of years later. I guess, just historically making me feel a little old, but this was a while ago. And what, I guess, like I just said, science has taught us since, or medical science at least, that the mind and body are more stuck together. But this, I guess it's some poetic feel about something that is a little bit dated, and that she can say, the body is just a spaniel, basically.
Somebody like Annie Dillard strikes me as someone who can see the infinite in the finite.
Yes, exactly. That's right.
And by her example, her writing example, she calls us to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's right.
Greg, I don't know if you saw, Nancy Meisland was offering a reflection on another Annie Dillard piece.
Oh, in the chat, I didn't see that. Yes, thank you, Nancy. Oh, An American Childhood. Yes, did you like that?
Well, my husband and I both read An American Childhood, which is set in Pittsburgh, the place where Annie Dillard grew up.
Mhm.
And the passage that I particularly remember, she's maybe 5 years old and she's lying in bed at night, and there's a light that comes into her room, and then it recedes, and it comes again, and it recedes. And so, of course, we're wondering what does she mean by this light? Well, it turns out, and there's, you picked up on something, Greg, that I hadn't really thought about with Annie Dillard, that sense of dread. And that there's something a little bit ominous about that light. But it turns out, as you read further, that the light is just the passing of cars past her bedroom, past her house at night. Well, like you, we were intrigued, my husband and I were intrigued by how Dillard is able to find that eternal, that infinite in just, and capture it. And so we were in Western Pennsylvania and we decided, all right, well, I think from the description in An American Childhood, we can find the street where she grew up, which we did. And we're pretty sure we figured out exactly what house. Oh my gosh, ordinary, tree-lined, single house, nice little 3-bedroom houses, pleasant, almost suburban section of Pittsburgh. And we're like, wait, this is just so ordinary, and yet out of it she managed to instill it with the sense of the numinous, the beyond, the way beyond human. And another place that we found, I think she waited for the school bus at a certain corner, and the Episcopal church was across the street from the corner where she sat. And again, we have all of the mystery of the ages of the Episcopal church condensed into her writing, that my husband and I sat on the corner, okay, cars go by, bus goes by, oh yeah, there's the church. And so her incredible ability to capture what in ordinary eyes, we don't see unless we maybe put on her glasses. And like you said, yes, I wish I do that more often, Greg, and I agree. But the aspect of Dillard that I hadn't thought about, but that you made me think about today, was that aspect of dread. And I was just reading some John Sanford, and he quotes someone else who indicates that always when we're approaching the eternal, we must have a sense of dread, because however loving and benign we might hope that our rapprochement with the eternal is in Christian thought, it's still awesome beyond what we can comprehend. And so that we have a sense of dread is right. And of course we would have a sense of dread. So thank you for sharing what, reminding me of the wonderful experience my husband and I had, and also of adding a new aspect to my own thinking about Annie Dillard's writing. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nancy. You're bringing up some old memories for me too, because this was the first thing I'd read from her, and then I, as soon as possible, had to read everything else I could get my hands on from her. I was, 18. I had a crush on her. Okay, she was amazing. She is amazing. She was born in 1945 in Pittsburgh, and after reading An American Childhood, I thought, well, it was actually a professor who said, Okay, now let's try something like that. Write about an epiphany that you lived through. It's easy to make it a childhood epiphany, but even here in the total eclipse, our whole lives were subject or can be looking for the new, the revelatory, and but that, yeah, American childhood taught me a lot about that. To remember how you looked at things when you were a 5-year-old, for good or for bad, and how a train or a street light when you're trying to go to sleep could scare the heck out of you, and how we get used to certain things in life. But I guess it doesn't matter in some ways, that a lot of things if there aren't more revelations to find in life, then what's the point? Again, I'm sorry to keep going off on tangents, but besides reminding me of Hamlet and James Joyce, this is something great to Google sometime, a really long Robert Browning poem that she made me think of with this, basically. And I'll email it to you guys if you'd like. But a line of this really long, earlier than Victorian era poem, Robert Browning states that that is humans' reach will always extend further than our grasp. Or what's a heaven for? If we could completely withhold and understand perfectly everything we ever see or touch or hear, why would we want to learn anything else? Why would we want to go on? So very inspiring stuff. Thank you.
That's beautiful, Greg. I'm remembering when Vince and I went down to Golconda, Illinois, 2017 for the eclipse.
Oh.
And there is so much there, and it's so fleeting. I don't know how many minutes we were in total darkness. Do you remember, Vince?
I don't remember. A couple of minutes.
Couple minutes, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But in those couple of minutes, the temperature dropped, the birds came out. And we were on a levee, overlooking the river there, and into Kentucky. And there were drummers, there were flute players, and then there was shouting. But it was otherworldly. It was, even though we have a scientific understanding of exactly what's happening today, so we don't need to be in existential dread of an apocalypse, it was still spine tingling and otherworldly. And so there's so much in that. But what I remember the most, and Vince does too, perhaps, the torturous drive home. It was forever getting back to Chicago, because all of Chicago was in Golconda, Illinois, it seemed.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And trying to get back on the fuel that we had and the donuts that were available at the 7-Eleven, which were very few, and the restroom lines, and just like Annie Dillard remembers the vegetable clown on the wall of the motel. I think I'll remember as much the drive home with trying to keep the dog calm in the back seat. So much to observe in life, right? And the power of the now, what's right before you is always rich if we would just notice. And we may not.
My response is, you can find extraordinary in the ordinary almost every minute of your waking day, if that's what you decide you want to spend your day doing. And as an aside, Jeffrey, I know at least half a dozen people who made the trek down to Southern Illinois for the eclipse. Every single one of them spends more time talking about the trip home and how difficult and challenging it was. And rather than, and how long did it take for the crowd to finally thin out as people, left the highway, versus the the magical of the 2 minutes that they went down to be with all of this humanity in the first place. Yeah.
Greg, we're at time. This is really rich for me personally, and I think for others too. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you all for your participation.